I would like to call the meeting to order at 11 o'clock a.m. I ask that as a courtesy to all that you ensure that you've silenced your cell phones. Also, I would like to remind our directors to turn their microphone on each time they speak to help with the audio and video recordings. For the record, I'll note that the public meeting notice was properly posted as required by law, and the notice of this board meeting was provided to each of the directors. Directors Abraham, Boren, Smith, and Fernandez have indicated that they would not be present for this meeting. We've reached the portion of the meeting where we set aside time to hear from you, the general public. Those interested in providing comments by filling out one of the cards available at the receptionist desk will be called to approach the podium to make their comments at this time. Does anybody wish to speak? Seeing no one wishes to speak, we'll move forward with our agenda. Item number 1, report and possible discussion on General Manager CEO report by David Collingsworth, General Manager CEO.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can y'all hear me?
No.
You good back there on the recording? Okay. A couple of things to talk through real quick. First of all, obviously we have a unique weather system coming, and I know that Texans are really interested in how this is going to play out. Just for your knowledge, we are ready to go. We are in full generator capacity to keep our water plant running. And we will meet, my staff will start meeting this afternoon to work through emergency coordination discussions should the weather be even worse than they're predicting. So we're ready to go, and if there are issues arise, I will certainly keep the board of directors updated. We have a quick agenda today. Probably should be done by about 12:15 or 12:30. Then we'll have lunch for you. The next meetings aren't going to be quite so short and simple. Just give you a little heads up on some of the things that we're working on for future meetings. In March, we're going to have a discussion with the board on proposed rules and regulation changes that our staff have been working real hard on in the last few months. We will bring those to you. You will have an opportunity to review them. We will take your input, and then we will create a draft rule for the public to review, and then that will start the process of allowing the public to look at, and then ultimately the board adoption in future meetings. Also in May, we will present you with a draft of our 2023 budget, and also have a very interactive strategic plan workshop. We have some real exciting things to let you look at as far as the development and evolution of our strategic plan goes. So we're looking forward to that in May. For those of you that are newer on the board, meaning less than 4 years old, in June, we hopefully, if COVID allows, we will begin our customer meetings again. It's customary for the Brazos River Authority in late May or early June to have 3 meetings in different regions of the basin where we sit down with our customers and really walk them through the details of all of our draft budget before the board adopts it. So you'll get invited to that. The first year of COVID, we didn't have that meeting at all because we weren't going up on our rates. Last year we had it, and it was a virtual meeting. But this year we hope to get face-to-face and have those meetings, and we'll invite you, and you'll be notified of that pretty soon. And then in July, we'll have our budget workshop where we will present our draft budget for your consideration, and if all that goes well, then you will adopt the new strategic plan and the new draft budget all on that day. So a lot of really good stuff coming down in the next few meetings. So last but not least, I want to tell you about somebody that's retiring today at 5 o'clock from the Brazos River Authority. And it's not very often that we bring employees that are retiring in front of the board for acknowledgement. But here in my hand, I have took my glasses off too early. I have a ID for a law enforcement officer. It says retired. They get their own retired ID when they retire from the BRA. And the reason that I wanted you to meet Davey Moore, if you haven't, because Davey Moore was a law enforcement officer for Brazos River Authority. He also was the lake manager at Lake Limestone for the Brazos River Authority, but more importantly, he dedicated 46 years of his life to the Brazos River Authority, and that is honorable. And you're not going to get it. Yeah,
You're here.
come on up, David. There's not enough time in the day for me to tell you all you need to know about this guy, but he is full of honor and integrity. He wears his Christian badge on his sleeve, and he's one of those leaders that has mentored so many people at the Brazos River Authority. And I told him this the other day at his party, I'm glad you're retiring. I didn't want to take that wrong. But I can sleep well at night because he is retiring, but his fingerprints are all over the people that he's mentored. So we're in really good hands. John Dixon has taken his place as the Lake Limestone manager. But again, Davey is one of those reasons that BRA is first class. So thank you, Davey, very much.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Cynthia, if I can have you up front and we can take a photo real quick, I'd appreciate that. I don't know that that's a ceremonial transfer.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
There's a lot of backlight here. Is that going to work?
That's better.
Is that better? Okay. By the way, he was 4 when he started.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a long time.
And last but not least,
I've been born.
today is Helen Jimenez's birthday. And I am not going to sing to you, but I challenge all of our board members, maybe during lunch, to pull you aside one-on-one and sing happy birthday to you. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Agenda item number 2, discussion and possible action on Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group contract amendments by Aaron Abel, Water Services Manager. Aaron?
Good morning, Madam Chair, Directors. This item before you requests several action items to support the regional flood planning activities really associated with the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group. It's a mouthful, also known as Region 8. You might recall that last January we came before you requesting the acceptance of the request that BRA be the sponsor and administrative agent for the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group. We also requested authorization to enter into a regional flood planning contract with the Texas Water Development Board and to accept funds from the board to support the activities. And also, we requested authorization to negotiate and enter into a professional services agreement with a technical consultant to help the group and prepare the initial regional flood plan. BRA entered into a regional flood planning contract with the Texas Water Development Board in April of 2021 to accept the grant funding on behalf of the group, and that we also selected, or the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group selected Half Associates as its technical consultant, and BRA to enter into the professional services agreement with Half in June of 2021. The first regional flood plans are due to the Texas Water Development Board next January. The 87th Texas Legislature appropriated additional funds to support the first cycle of regional flood planning. The Texas Water Development Board met in late September of last year to approve the allocation of the available funding between the 15 flood planning regions and to approve the Texas Water Development Board to execute contract amendments with sponsors of the regional flood planning groups and to incorporate the additional funding. A total of $10 million was approved to be allocated over the 15 flood planning regions. $758,500 was allocated to the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group. To accept this additional funding on behalf of the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group, we're requesting the following. Authorization to amend the regional flood planning contract with the Texas Water Development Board to accept the additional funds to support the regional flood planning activities. Furthermore, we're also requesting authorization to amend the professional services agreement with Half Associates on behalf of the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group to incorporate the additional funding in that agreement. Finally, we're also requesting authorization and approval of amendments to the fiscal year 2022 operating budget to support the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group activities. BRA's involvement in regional and state flood planning activities falls under the strategic plan, specifically Goal 4A1. The additional grant funding from the Texas Water Development Board will augment the first cycle of regional flood planning in the areas of public outreach, data collection, flood management evaluations, and identifying and evaluating additional recommended flood mitigation projects. Costs associated with regional flood planning activities are covered by the Texas Water Development Board grant revenues and will have a zero net effect on the BRA's FY 2022 adopted system rate. We do have a resolution, but I can answer any questions if anyone may have.
Any questions? Seeing no questions. Read the resolution.
Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. Be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes the General Manager, CEO, to execute appropriate amendments to the Regional Flood Planning Contract with the Texas Water Development Board in order to support Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group activities. Be it further resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes the General Manager, CEO, to amend the current professional services agreement to increase the total amount by $714,000 to $2,199,500 with Half Associates, Inc. on behalf of the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group to support activities associated with the first cycle of regional flood planning. Be it further resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes and approves amendments to the fiscal year 2022 water supply operating budget to support the Lower Brazos Regional Flood Planning Group activities as follows. Increase the FY 2022 water supply grant revenue budget by $455,000 from its current level of $1,391,469 to $1,846,469, and increase the corresponding federal reservoirs professional services expense budget by $455,000 from $1,763,868 to $2,218,868.
You've heard the reading of the resolution.
I move that we accept.
Motion made by Director Wilson, second by Director Crone. Please spell the board.
Presiding Officer Flores?
Yes.
Director Huber?
Yes.
Director Taylor?
Yes.
Director Geezy?
Yes.
Director Henderson?
Abstain.
Director Jimenez?
Yes.
Director Crone?
Yes.
Director LaChance? Director Lattimore?
Yes.
Director Leslie?
Yes.
Director Lloyd?
Yes.
Director Luton?
Yes.
Director Embro?
Yes.
Director Ruiz?
Yes.
Director Sanderson?
Yes.
Director Savage?
Yes.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Agenda item number 3, discussion and possible action on Lake Granbury Reinforced Concrete Component CIP budget amendment by Mike McClendon, Upper Basin Regional Manager. Mike.
All right. Thank you, Presiding Officer Flores. Members of the board, good morning. This presentation today seeks the board's approval to issue a budget adjustment to, or in response to the project progressing more quickly than we had anticipated. Can you go to the next slide? All right. The board approved staff to execute a contract with Walter P. Moore for an amount up to $735,000. After contract negotiations and discussions, our actual contract not to exceed was $668,000. We had programmed about $560,000 in our FY22 budget. The scope, as I said earlier, the scope's progressed more quickly than we had anticipated. Whenever the FY22 budget was prepared, we had really anticipated this going across over into FY23, covering 2 fiscal years. And it's really about timing. It's about whenever we built the budget for FY22 and then when we actually executed the contract with Walter P. Moore. Therefore, we're seeking to transfer approximately $130,000 to cover the project costs. This project has 3 tasks associated with it. We're in task 2, and we'll be proceeding to task 3, which is going to be the final report, and that'll be around mid-March timeframe. Task 1 with the project, just real briefly, was kind of data analysis and then some theoretical calculations. Task 2 was whenever we went out to Granbury and on buttresses 1 and 44, we actually collected real values, so like concrete strength, the amount of corrosion, the soil properties. And so in task 3, the firm will go out or go in and analyze that data, and they'll determine whether or not any repairs are necessary. Right now, the engineers, it's too early to tell, but it doesn't look like there will be anything substantive come out of their findings. So there's no structural issues. It doesn't, more cosmetic, I think, some cracking and spalling of the concrete, but I'll have more in March. So I guess just to briefly review, we're not seeking a budget increase. We're seeking the board's approval to move $130,000 from other capital projects that we have in FY22 that show us savings. And I do have a resolution for your consideration, but I can also take any questions if you have.
Any questions for Mike? Seeing no questions, will you read the resolution?
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
The scope didn't change, but the fee's gonna change?
No, sir. The not to exceed is still the 668. All we're doing is we programmed I can't remember the exact, $500,000 in FY22. And we had actually anticipated that going into FY23 based upon when we executed that contract. We built the budget months before we executed the contract. And so what we're doing now is we're just taking funds to cover to complete the cost because it's moved more quickly than we had anticipated. We actually anticipated going into 2 fiscal years.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
You ready for me to read?
Please read the resolution.
Be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes the General Manager, CEO, to execute a fiscal year 2022 budget adjustment of $130,000 to Lake Granbury Reinforced Concrete Components Capital Improvement Project, increasing the FY 2022 budget for this project to $690,000.
You've heard the reading of the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Director Lattimore, and then second by Director Henderson. Please poll the board.
Presiding Officer Flores,
Yes?
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
Yes.
Director Geezy,
Yes.
Director Henderson,
Yes.
Director Jimenez,
Yes.
Director Crone,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Leslie,
Yes.
Director Lloyd,
Yes.
Director Luton,
Yes.
Director Ambrose,
Yes.
Director Ruiz,
Yes.
Director Sanderson,
Yes.
Director Savage,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Agenda item number 4, discussion and possible action on contract for design and construction phase services for environmental lab by Tiffany Malzahn, Environmental and Compliance Manager. Tiffany.
Hi, thank you. If you'll remember back in May, we came to you and discussed the results of our feasibility study regarding the environmental lab and some options for expansion there. Now we're ready and here to ask for permission to move into design. If you'll recall, 3 independent reviews have cited some deficiencies in our current space. One, it's very small. We don't currently have adequate room for the existing analysis, much less trying to expand our analyses. We have insufficient on-site storage, resulting in the aquatic scientists have to make about a 20-minute drive north of town to get their boats and their trucks and some of their other equipment that we keep off-site because there's not room here to store everything. Additionally, they don't have a workshop space, and probably one of the biggest drivers is the environmental controls in the structure are inadequate, and there's something that we fight a lot with analysis. If the humidity gets too high, we can't run certain analyses for weeks at times. That creates a lot of inefficiency because we may have to go back out and recollect samples we've already spent time and effort on, or we just lose the data because we can't run it within the holding time. So that's why we had embarked on the feasibility study. And we had started that pre-pandemic, so before remote working. So I was just going to give a brief overview of the conclusions of that initial study, which was central office has a large amount of space, but it's very poorly utilized. And for projected growth in employees, we had a net need of over 24,000 square feet of office space. And even with that, Gresham Smith had recommended some ways that we could reorganize central office and encompass that growth without having to build additional office space elsewhere on the property. However, even with that, they said we would likely reach maximum capacity of this building within 15 years. And that estimate required the environmental lab and actually all of environmental services, the Office of Safety and Security at the time, and the electricians and SCADA guys to also be in a new facility. However, with the success of remote working, we went back and asked them to do some more additional evaluations. They reduced the off-site recommendation 3 different ways to make that footprint smaller. Then they also looked at the options of building a laboratory and a storage shop building on adjacent property right next door, and or expanding the laboratory and central office. The laboratory and central office was not a really grand idea because it displaced too many existing employees, much less eliminated any room for growth of new employees. So after the discussion in May, we strongly recommended that we go with the build a laboratory and shop building adjacent to central office on the property right out here. The Class 4 Opcc estimates we got out of the feasibility study for that, for scenario 4 rendered, we went with the high-end estimate at $8,812,000 for budgeting purposes. Mainly, Gresham Smith at that time felt that that would encompass any of the supply chain issues and delays that we're seeing at this time. So they strongly recommended we budget high, and we've done so in the budget. And this is just a conceptual drawing. Here's central office. The lab structure would go here, and then the aquatic scientist equipment storage and workshop would go right next to that. A little more detail on the lab. You can see we've put a lot of effort into looking at it, but it does also have room for future growth. There's a lot of space that's going to be unutilized, so we won't be in the same situation we were when we first moved in this building, that we were out of space the day we moved in. So we have increased growth in there, so as regulatory requirements necessitate changes in analyses, we can accommodate that. And this is just a quick drawing of the boat storage facility. One thing that is unique, we also do sediment processing, looking at the size of grains of sand and cobble and everything else in the bottom of the river, and that's a noisy, loud, and messy process, so that will go adjacent in the field guys' workshop, because no one wants it in this building, and no one certainly wants it in the laboratory where the vibrations would interfere with their analytical equipment. Some components unique to the laboratory design and that go into that Opcc estimate. Temperature control, holding a steady temperature between 70 and 73 degrees. We have a lot of temperature sensitive equipment out there, and big variations in temperature can disrupt the performance of that equipment. We also need the ambient humidity maintained less than 50%. Like I said, that's one of the biggest things we have fought in this building over the years. It improved with the new air conditioning system, but it's still not perfect. We need varied specialty electric loads in different parts of the building to power different pieces of equipment. We'll have multiple isolated HVAC systems based on what's being done in each analytical area. Deionized and ultra-pure water systems and a distribution across the laboratory space. Chemical neutralization systems, so that anything we send to the City of Waco wastewater treatment plant is compliant with their IPP requirements. Ventilation systems, including chemical fume hoods, snorkels, and steam vents. Also with the ventilation, it's very important that it be designed in a way that motion-sensitive equipment isn't impacted. After the new air conditioning project here, we had a significant problem that thankfully our facilities technicians put a lot of work in, but it was blowing too powerful and we couldn't use our balance, which we use literally for every single analysis we do. But we have some really smart guys on the facilities tech team and they figured out a good workaround for us. Lines for carrying compressed gas to fuel, power some of the equipment, fire suppression system, and of course, standard laboratory safety things, eye wash stations, emergency showers in case someone spills on themselves, and analytical waste collection and storage areas. So probably some of the biggest values in the new laboratory, aside from getting us out of central office and relinquishing that space for use for other office spaces, it will eliminate the exposure to the rest of central office should we ever have a spill. Right now, we're all connected on the same air conditioning system, and we do have some potent chemicals. We don't have large quantities of them, but enough that could cause some issues if we ever dropped a bottle or had a spill. It will improve ventilation and air quality for the laboratory staff over what they have now, and it will improve our climate control abilities to give us a more stable environment so we won't have to fight temperature and humidity issues as much. It'll give them some increased safety and productivity because they'll have more space and we can design workflows in a way that makes sense so that they're not on top of each other, but also like things are together. And we spent a lot of time with that, and I'll have a graphic here showing you kind of how we coordinated those complex workflows. And also having all their equipment on one site, having adequate shop space will certainly increase efficiency for the aquatic scientist. And this is just a workflow mapping of each color represents a different analysis and how we've planned to get things. And so you have like processes together, you'll have digestion of your nutrients right next to the room that you then go to do your analysis in. You have balances and proximity to the places where you need them. So it is quite an intense look that we have spent in the feasibility study. Typical industry unit costs for laboratory construction from Level Set, which is a group that monitors construction costs, and they have a southern United States estimate is $756 per square foot. When you compare that to what we have in our Opcc, and this is on the left, that is just for the laboratory. That does not include the storage facility in it, but it breaks down and we come in at $701 a square foot. And then Gresham Smith, oops, wrong one. Their construction estimator out of Dallas came up with these based on numbers they've seen recently and said, we would be a specialty environmental lab. We certainly don't need to elevate to a clean room environment, anywhere between $700 and $1,500 per square foot. So our estimates are right in line for the laboratory structure with industry standards. We did put out an RFP after May for the construction in design phase services. It'll support strategic plan goal number 4C. We received 2 responses. We selected Gresham Smith, which is an architectural and engineering firm. They had extensive laboratory design experience and extensive experience designing the size of laboratory we do and the types of analyses we do. The other respondent unfortunately didn't have very much laboratory design. If we were just building office space or storage space, they'd have been a real strong contender, but laboratory space is apparently a niche industry. So we have spent the last several months negotiating a contract with Gresham Smith. We have 6 tasks in our contract. Preliminary evaluation services, that's where they'll do geotech, surveying. Since we started a lot of this a long time ago, we have replaced some lab equipment, so they'll come in and look and see what the requirement needs are for the new equipment. Then they'll move to engineering design. They think that's roughly a little more than a year for that process. And then to go through the construction support, they are estimating another year for actual construction, but those are the items included in their contract. And we have a not to exceed fee by task. total when we're done of $1,494,343,000. That includes both design and all the construction phase services. Can you move it one? Because it's not moving for me now. Okay, our next steps, we would like to ask permission to execute that contract and move into design. And then once we have a design done, we'll come back to you and request approval to move to the next stage to advertise for construction and bidding. Okay, I have a resolution, but I'm assuming there'll be some questions first.
Tiffany, I have a question. I didn't see any expense noted regarding IT and infrastructure regarding security and safety.
That
And-
is in the contract scope of work in that initial preliminary design evaluation services to sit down. They do have, in their OPCC, they had 327 individual items that included security things, but we do have a task in there to sit with our safety and security staff and our IT staff to make sure everything that gets built is compliant with the systems that they need and already have.
Okay, yes.
Tiffany, I just commend you and your team for doing such a thorough job of determining your needs and future needs and everything there. It's a great job. It's becoming one of the most important aspects of the River Authority here, is that your department, so thank you.
Well, thank you.
Jen?
I also want to echo that great job on all you do. What I didn't see in your presentation is how many new jobs will having this new lab bring? And will it bring any additional revenue once you get it up and running?
Well, unfortunately, the laboratory is not necessarily a cost center for us.
Sure.
We do most of our analyses to support programs that we're legislatively bound to support. So that's the unfortunate downside of the lab. We do anticipate over time that it will lead to some increased levels of employee. We could really use a third lab tech. However, the immediate future, once we build it, we haven't even discussed going that route yet because we just don't have anywhere to put them. So I would say at least one additional laboratory technician would come on board with that for the moment. And as we continue to grow, if we do continue to grow, we would have the room to add additional technicians. We just this year, to support the new lake monitoring initiative, have brought on 2 additional aquatic scientists. So right now they're kind of rotating and sharing their office spaces with each other. So all total, I think you would maybe bring on 3 to 4 new employees. It's one of those, it depends on how much we grow, how many new tasks come our way from the legislature. That seems to happen somewhat frequently. And also a lot of this is not so much growing the lab, other than we know there's new analyses coming down the pipe for us through EPA and TCEQ negotiations that eventually we'll have to respond to. But it's really trying to make the lab whole now as it is one of the strongest reasons we're trying to move forward. Is they work in an extremely unfortunate situation. We're just really lucky that we have some really talented, dedicated lab staff.
Is there any potential for remote workers as well to be added to that staff?
We do have in the department several remote workers. I think any of the more, I want to say, project management style staff could certainly be remote workers. Data management, quality assurance staff. The quality staff do have to be here a limited amount because they actually have to physically put their hands on things and make sure checks are being done, but a lot of their work can be done remote. With the fact that we have 2 additional field staff and not 2 additional office spaces right now, they're doing data entry and analysis tasks from their homes, so there's certainly more potential, especially as more office space is needed in the central office for some of us to convert to a more intensive remote work situation.
Director Lattimore had a question.
Maybe this is a late question, but talk me through the logic. One of the things that I saw as I was preparing for the meeting, talk me through the logic of why it makes sense to put the laboratory here on the central campus on property that is probably pretty expensive versus going out in the field somewhere and picking a place that would be much cheaper to build?
We initially looked at that. We looked at some properties in the Waco Industrial Foundation area. Unfortunately, with the growth the city is having, that land is getting snatched up very quickly and has risen exponentially in cost from the time we developed this. One of the things that's really important is kind of logistics location. So putting them out in McGregor or somewhere, but where they don't have access to all the avenues in and out of town, again, kind of proves a logistic issue for the aquatic scientists who move all over the state or all over the basin. But we did look at those. It was a significantly larger expense. And so at the time to be sensitive on the cost of knowing that we are a cost sink rather than a cost generating business, went for what we thought was the best option that didn't impact central office significantly as far as reducing office space, but also was the most cost effective because we weren't having to go spend an extra $1 million or $2 million on additional land.
And by the way, I agree wholeheartedly with the separation of the two buildings. I think that makes an awful lot of sense. Thank you.
Director Savage had a question.
Tiffany, this may not be a question that you can answer, but I'm concerned because now we've had several RFPs where we don't have, we have two that responded and one wasn't even qualified in building a lab, so I don't know how they were put on the bidders list. So we have one bidder essentially. It looks like, you benchmarked your cost according to what you presented and we're in the $700, at the very low end of the range. So it's not really a cost question, but it's more a concern that are we doing what we should be doing to make sure we've got a list of suppliers and bidders, that should be pursuing a pretty significant project. We had a similar situation, in our last meeting, and I'm just a little bit concerned that we're not getting enough people interested in our business, and I don't know why that
I will say when we went for the feasibility, we had about 4 proposers to do the feasibility work. I think the fact, and this was a decision we made at the time with the gentleman who was the tech services manager at the time, who's no longer here, was not to preclude the people who do the feasibility work from doing the design work. So I think a couple of those other bidders that were in the ballpark of qualified saw that we weren't making that preclusion and probably chose not to bid for that reason, because I'm assuming they made the assumption that we would go with the company that did the feasibility work as long as we were happy with them. In fact, one of them did call before we ever put the RFP out and just said, hey, how happy were you with their services? And I noticed they did actually end up on the Gresham Smith team doing some things that are in their specialty area. So I think it was more the fact that we didn't preclude the folks doing the feasibility work from bidding versus a lack of interest in our particular project. I think a lot of the firms with lab design experience just saw that and went, it's a lot of work for us to put together a proposal and we're pretty sure we're not going to get it, so.
Thanks.
I don't know that that's
Well,
the answer, but that's the answer
well,
of what I think is happening.
So like the refining industry, they build a lot of labs too, and they're not building any new ones. And there's companies that do that work that I would think would be hungry for that work. So it doesn't add up, in terms of the level of interest versus, significant projects. Everybody's hungry for work, I think. But anyway, thank you. You did a terrific job. It's benchmarked at the low end of the range, and thanks.
Director Sanderson.
Now, was the company selected, the folks that did the feasibility study just?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you're right about casting a wide net. It's always good to do that if you can, but in that circumstance, I can kind of see why that could have played out that way, right? Your staff count in this laboratory, what's your staff count going to be in that building when it opens up, assuming you don't hire a new person?
It'll be 3 full-time in there and then quality assurance staff, which is 2 on a part-time basis.
So 4 FTEs, but whatever, okay. Are those all coming from on-site? My recollection is these folks are kind of coming from the hinterlands?
No, everyone is
Here already?
based here already.
All right.
The aquatic scientists will also have some workspaces in that. That will not be their primary workspace, but they will have rooms for when they bring back fish and insects that need to be processed, mussels, they'll have some room. So they won't be a full-time occupant, but I'd say they'd have a 30% occupancy, and then that's another.
But we're reallocating the locals, basically, into a different spot.
Yes.
So you're not gonna have any parking problems?
No.
Okay. Good. There. As far as McGregor's concerned, closer you get to Fort Hood, the shakier it gets for some reason. The 8-inch guns are going off. And also you got the rocket plant, and it gets pretty shaky around there at night especially. So I can see not doing that for a lot of different reasons. Mostly shaky. Yeah. Oh, well, at Granny's house, you'd be amazed. Things are jumping around on the counter.
So the further you move operations away from here, the more money it costs to do samples. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
cost of doing.
I understand. Is there, and I gather that, everybody's this is not the only river authority in Texas, right? There's no way that we can find a way to maybe monetize it a little bit and maybe get some business from elsewhere or anything like that?
I think the biggest issue is, and we've looked at that several times in the past, is the biggest volume of samples is in drinking water treatment or wastewater treatment.
Yes. Okay.
To bring those in-house, and it's not that we couldn't, we used to operate a wastewater lab out of Williamson County, is that, one, we are right between Dallas, Houston, College Station, and Austin, all of which have multiple accredited labs geared toward servicing those industries. The River Authority and the surface water, the biggest problem we've struggled with, and we have tried at times to do some contracting out, is for the surface water program, and it's why you see most river authorities have their own lab for surface waters. We're required to seek significantly lower detection levels than drinking water or wastewater. Staff have to, which makes sense because we're chasing diluted chemicals in large bodies of water. And they also, back when they established that program in the 90s, it was not popular. So at the time, TCEQ established a significantly robust quality control requirements that we have to meet that other water and wastewater programs don't have to. So we have struggled to find between holding times. Some of our analysis have to be processed within 8 hours of collection, others within 12, 24, and 48. Being able to ship samples has proved a problem for those particular ones. Others have a 7-week hold time, so if anything goes wrong in the shipping process, you've lost that effort again. But also, we just have not ever found a contract lab that's really successful in meeting our requirements, even once there's a little lab out in West Texas here that does services water and wastewater, and they agreed to try to meet our standards, and they have about a 70% success rate, and that's with our lab analysts talking them through our samples and how to do it, whereas we generally run a 99% success rate. And it's just the difference of, one, most labs that are geared toward water and wastewater, it's a fairly standard quality of what you're getting. Influent is influent, effluent from a functional plant is effluent. We're bringing water from the upper basin that's saltier than the Dead Sea. We're going over the Navasota system where it looks like chocolate milk. We've got highly mineralized water coming out of the Williamson County area because of all the limestone. So our techs have learned how to tackle each one of those and still achieve those low-level analyses. For someone who hasn't gotten 15 years of working with our samples, that seems to be a real struggle. So it's not that we couldn't contract it out. I don't think there's enough need for the surface water samples for us to make a cost center out of it. We could certainly look at water and wastewater, or wastewater would be the easiest to bring in-house because the accreditation is the same as what we have. We just have to expand it.
Right.
We did plan for enough additional space if we needed to add some wastewaters, but also through the accreditation, surface water and wastewater have to be separate so you don't have the chance of contamination. So we would have to have 2 areas to run bacteria analyses, 2 areas for solids analysis. versus one. So we did put a lot of effort into looking at that and have looked at that repeatedly over the years, and we've just never really been able, between the large commercial labs set up to run thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of wastewater samples a year, I don't know that we could ever be competitive with that.
Tiffany, we appreciate your homework on this, on this topic. Dr. Ruiz had
She
a,
answered my question.
okay, and then right here, Director Ford.
Tiffany, looking at the construction budget you gave and looking at the design fees, that seems way out of whack to me as far as a design cost on a regular commercial building. Are design fees substantially higher on labs than they are on regular commercial buildings?
Well, the design fee, if you, if you just look at the top two items, which are the actual things that go into design, that's about 11% of the estimated construction cost.
But still, the total is about 17%.
Yes, and that is, we do have a lot of excess, especially in the task 4 and 5. That was based off conversations with Gresham Smith that indicated that, you know, there's a lot of difficulty, and we do have a representative from Gresham Smith. I should have introduced him earlier, Tim O'Brien, that when you're working with your contractors, you didn't want to necessarily, for the same reasons Director Savage talked, limit your contractor pool to people only with lab building experience, because then you end up with a very limited number of bidders. But that when you're working with a contractor who maybe doesn't necessarily have a significant lab background, there's a lot of, and I'm trying to attention to specs and requirements, and they'll try to either work around those, and so there's a lot of additional efforts that they will have to do trying to get those contractors familiar. However, one thing we did do, all of this is on a time and material. They have a not to exceed, but time and material. So legal and the representatives from Gresham Smith were going to work on some language in the bidding documents that would hopefully limit that contractor's desire to try to pave his own path and go outside the lines. So hopefully these will be, what actually gets billed will be significantly less than what we anticipated, but we did try to budget for what we believe will be the absolute worst case scenario.
Okay.
Director Embro.
Yeah, Tiffany, I think you did an excellent job with the presentation. It's a lot of information to cover. My question is regarding the approach with the existing laboratory and the new laboratory. Number one, is there an approach to make sure that it's a cost-effective approach with the existing structure, what we're going to do with it afterwards, the material? Are we using that for the new building? Are we providing absolutely brand new material? And can you explain what we're going to do with the equipment? I mean, and can you explain?
Oh, our existing equipment and stuff, we are going to, like I said, over the last couple of years, and this just hit right in the middle of, on our laboratory asset management plan, we have recently replaced several. So most of the analytical equipment, in fact, all of the actual equipment, we're just going to move over. Most of the refrigerators, I think, are of an age to move over. There's a few things we will need to rebuild a vent hood. One of the vent hoods that's back here is original to the building, and it's built in such a way that we would have to be pretty destructive. I think we would destroy the vent hood trying to get it out of where it is. So we will be looking at construction of at least one, if not two, additional ventilation hoods. And maybe we have a glassware washer back there. It's still functional, but it's reaching what we know to be about the end of its useful life. So for the existing equipment, most of it we intend to move and not purchase new, but there are a few items in there that it might make good sense while we're at it to just go ahead and get a new one based on our experience of how long these different items last. I will say the storage building is going to be a pre-engineered metal building that is a color complementary to the rest of the central office, and then the lab will be a masonry structure, but also put in there trying to make it complementary, but it may not necessarily be made out of hand-cut limestone, which we know is pricey. So we are trying on exterior materials to make everything look nice and cohesive, but not break the bank on finishes. Because to my staff, they don't really care about what it looks like, they just want it to function, but we also know it needs to look nice and represent the authority well. So I don't know if I even remotely got close to your question.
No, you did. You did. And I guess the other part to my question is there a transition plan to go from one to the other, or is it you're going to be working at the existing one until the new one gets completed?
We will be working at the new one until we have everything moved over. Traditionally, when we've had issues like when we had the mold project where we had to move out, we will start planning for that months in advance as far as making sure we get as many samples collected and analyzed before time so that we have a minimal miss on our sample collection and analysis, and then have a big move. And I would say generally 2 to 3 weeks we'll have a downtime while we go in, because per our accreditation, lab staff's gonna have to test every piece of equipment and verify that it is still functioning, and even though we're only moving it 20 feet, they still have to go through the same process to verify the functioning. We saw that last year after the Great Freeze. It took us about 3 weeks to go through all the testing to verify all our equipment came through okay, and one of them didn't. We took some extra time to get it back functional, but so it will be a process. We will have some downtime, but we plan to work up as long as we can in the existing structure. And then once we're out, and then at that point, it'll be I guess a decision for David and management team, what we do with the existing laboratory, if we do anything right this minute, or do we wait till we have a more compelling need for more office space and want to do a more substantial project at that time.
Very good. Director Sanderson.
What did I have? We have experience with the vendor, I guess, that was utilizing or proposing to utilize. Have we done business with them before?
With the design engineer
Yeah.
firm, yes, they did the feasibility study. We were very pleased with their efforts. They've been, no.
Okay.
We have not built anything new from the ground up since we built this building that I'm aware of, structure-wise.
All right, Director Jimenez has a question.
Yes. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation. My question, I guess it was a two-part. It was a bidding, like how many bids, and is there any way to get any other bids for the project? And also what the difference is between scenario 4 and 5.
Scenario 5 expands the existing lab within central office. So that would, expanding it to and it would be smaller than what we're going to build, so we'd have no additional, it'd just give us a little room to add some new analyses and create some more wiggle room and some workplace efficiencies and workflow efficiencies. That would displace, if I remember the number right, 50 individuals here that would need to go to remote working to take that chunk out of the existing central office structure and dedicate it to that.
Okay.
So that was the main difference, whereas scenario 4 is building the lab and the equipment storage space just adjacent off the south end of central office, I think south end. So that we would have more office space and be just less disruptive to existing employees who are already officed out of this building. So that was the biggest difference. The only other significant difference is scenario 5 would have required structural modifications to central office, whereas scenario 4, if we ever want to go and implement Gresham Smith's other recommendations for creating an open space work plan that would seat a whole lot more workers, that doesn't necessarily require a structural modification to the building. So that was another thing that I think everyone had significant concerns given some of our history on things that would be structural in nature on changes to this building.
All right, Tiffany, thank you very much for all the information. There is a resolution. Will you please read the resolution?
Be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorizes the General Manager, CEO, to negotiate and enter into a contract with Gresham Smith, an architectural and engineering firm, for design services, bid phase services, construction contract administration, construction phase engineering, and resident project representative services of the Environmental Services Laboratory and Equipment Storage Building in an amount not to exceed $1,494,343.
You've heard the reading of the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt? Director Savage, second by Director Crone. Please pull the board.
Presiding Officer Flores.
Yes.
Director Huber.
Yes.
Director Taylor.
No.
Director Geezy.
Yes.
Director Henderson.
Yes.
Director Jimenez.
Yes.
Director Crum.
Yes.
Director Lattimore.
Yes.
Director Leslie.
Yes.
Director Lloyd.
Yes.
Director Luton.
Yes.
Director Embro.
Yes.
Director Ruiz.
Yes.
Director Sanderson. Director Savage.
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Agenda item number 5, report and possible discussion on threatened and endangered species engagement evaluation methodology by Tiffany Malzahn, Environmental and Compliance Manager. Tiffany.
For those of you who've been on the board a while, you've heard me discuss threatened and endangered mussels in the basin or the potential for them for quite some time. And we are currently in a period of definite expanded U.S. Fish and Wildlife attention on private lands, extending their historical focus from just dealing with federal lands. And what we have seen in the last 8 to 10 years is that interest has greatly expanded across the state of Texas. And additionally, starting about 2014, they really started to get interested in aquatic species. And that was some of what necessitated us going down the path of working on freshwater mussels and negotiating that candidate conservation agreement with assurances. But through that process, you know, we received comments from the board a couple times of, gee, this could be limitless. How many species will we have to deal with? Things like that. So basically, to respond to that, we have worked and developed an assessment methodology to determine when BRA should engage in a species-specific issue or when we should not. And basically, as our population continues to grow, I don't think this is going to be a situation that gets less. So we're hoping to narrow down using this methodology to items that really have, and species that really have the potential to impact our core business. Can they impact our exercise of our water rights? Will they in fact impact our existing properties and easements or our future water supply projects? There are a lot of species out there that may affect us during construction. Allen's Creek will be a prime example. We'll have to deal with Houston toad and whooping cranes and migratory birds, but none of that do we need to put a significant investment of time and effort into other than what it takes to receive the federal permits. But there are some species out there where it is to our benefit to spend some time and effort studying and contributing to the general knowledge base and really learning how many of those species or how many of the organisms are out there. There's a very low bar that U.S. Fish and Wildlife has to meet to put something on the threatened and endangered list. And oftentimes that process is very well utilized as an effective tool by environmental action groups to effectuate the change in human behavior that they wish to see, because the Endangered Species Act is such a powerful regulation. So as we developed this methodology and worked through a way, how do we decide what BRA should engage in or not? We came up with an evaluation matrix that goes through 18 different metrics on each species. And what we will do is annually we're going to run this assessment. We will add any new species that have popped up on Parks and Wildlife or U.S. Fish and Wildlife databases. And if there's been any significant change to the existing status of the species or knowledge base about the species. And each metric gets assessed on a scale of 1 to 5. And with the 5 being the worst case scenario for BRA, 1 is not an issue. And we kind of put our dividing line for additional look and work at about 3.5. Once we identify a species at 3.5, we'll sit down and we'll make some recommendations for further engagement. That may just be continuing to monitor the species process in the federal or the state threatened and endangered processes. May, depending on what we know about the species, recommend the need for a special study where we feel it's significantly in BRA's benefit to go out and contribute to the base knowledge on the species. Another option may be we wrote our candidate conservation agreement with assurances in such a way that freshwater mussels we know are going to continue to be an issue and we expect to see more mussels come up. We can easily amend that CCA to address those mussels. Same with a lot of the fish that we know are out there on the list in our basin. We can easily roll those into the CCAA. What we'll do is once we've completed our analysis, we plan to present that to the Risk Management Committee annually for further consideration, and then if warranted, we'll bring those issues up to the board. Our first evaluation we went ahead and ran, we evaluated a little over 1,200 species out of the Parks and Wildlife Rare, Threatened, and Endangered database and several U.S. Fish and Wildlife Work Plans species list. Out of that analysis, we came up with 3 species that exceeded 3.5 or greater on points, and that's the Brazos water snake, the Texas fawnfoot, and the Balcony spike. The bottom 2 are the freshwater mussels that we have already engaged on and developed the candidate conservation agreement with assurances. So the Brazos water snake is the final species out there that we think is worthy of BRA spending some time and effort on for the moment. Just to give you a few statistics out of that evaluation, really for the most part, we're talking probably about that wedge of the pie that we would ever have to look at. Those are the true aquatics and the things that are going to be impacted by our use of water and our exercise of water rights, or that have the potential to be impacted. And then again, one of the things we really looked at is how many, there's a very narrow wedge of species that only are known to occur in the Brazos Basin. So, and that's where the Brazos water snake and the Balcony spike certainly fall in that little wedge. And overall, one of the key things that they look at, especially when they're dealing with a lot of the terrestrials, is where is the breeding occurring. Of all the species evaluated, we have a very low number of species that use the Brazos Basin as breeding habitat, and same for overlap with our water supply systems, easements. And that is, of all the species we evaluated, that is a summary of where the scores came out. So even going forward, if something significant happened in those, it's still a very small number that we would ever hopefully have to consider. And we think we have a pretty comprehensive list. It's the federal process is certainly anyone in the state or the country for that matter can make a petition on any species with very little knowledge. So there may be some things that come up in the future we didn't predict in this, but we tried to be very comprehensive in coming up with a metric to determine when we move forward on something in which species we don't engage on. So that was
I recognize that all of the authorities have different, we're water, right? Mm-hmm. Another electricity, et cetera. So who's out there that's your partner with, surely somebody has a methodology in place. I mean, are you recreating a system for the BRA that somebody else already has to determine which one we should focus on?
No, I don't think so. I will say that the freshwater mussel issue, I think, kind of was a little bit of a sucker punch for most of us. I am not aware of any of the other river authorities that have gone through a ranking scenario like this. There are definitely, and we did use, there's these, it's the Nature Serve Explorer Index where they do rank species on level of criticality and level of basically global status and who they think is threatened, who's not. We did work those metrics into ours, but I am not aware of any other river authority, and we do meet fairly frequently with GBRA, LCRA, and TRA, at least because we're all kind of in the same area and battle some of the same species that I've not heard and honestly didn't specifically let them know we were doing this either. But I don't think that I have seen anyone else. Everyone kind of takes it on a species by species basis. This, I'm hoping, will give us a little early warning before it's too late and something's already in the federal process, that we at least know what's coming. But no, I'm not aware of anyone else having done anything to evaluate species on this level.
I know it's good to be proactive and starting to evaluate what you think might be the next thing coming up the pike, but we could put money forward to studying something, but then other outside entities could say it's the mosquito, and then all of a sudden we're to the mosquito. I mean, what value, how important is our study going to be, and our money's going to this study or for anything that you decide is a priority?
The value is having data to defend ourselves. Usually gathering the data takes an extensive amount of time. If we wait till it's already working through the federal system, we probably don't have the time to generate the data we would need to defend. I'll use the water snake as an example, and I'm giving a spoiler alert for the next one. Texas Parks and Wildlife started to have a discussion, and they brought in universities, other state researchers across the state to work on the Brazos water snake. And right now there's really only one university that's doing a lot of significant work, but throughout that discussing why is the Brazos water snake population declining? Universally, the answer was because there's Possum Kingdom, Lake Granbury, and Lake Whitney. The population didn't start to decline until 1990. Those reservoirs had all been in place for a significant amount of time before that without any impact to the population. However, things we do know is snake fungal disease came to the region at about that time, and that really impacts some of their behavior and makes them more prone to predation by other species because they don't necessarily have as good a survival instincts as they would. We've also seen fire ants reach that part of the basin at the time. So there's other potential impactors out there, but they're not necessarily being looked at, and we don't have necessarily some of the data to defend that. Now, last summer, to plan for the study that I was going to ask for some funding for, in my next agenda item, we did some preliminary work and found that snake fungal disease was occurring at 44% in the number of specimens we caught, whereas the previously reported occurrence was about 27%. So trying to get some of that data, no one else is going to go out and get it. So that snake is going to be something that has the potential to impact our water supply. And that's really what we focused our metrics on. Is it going to have the potential to impact how we use our water? You're right, there's always a potential for something else to come up. But on these, hopefully we have identified the things that have the potential to impact our water. A mosquito or a plant. Most of the fish aren't going to impact our ability to use our water supply. So we're really trying to hone in and not trying to go chase every species. And honestly, as a biologist, the Endangered Species Act and the way it's written, I don't agree with, because you're trying to keep something meant to change static, but no one really cares about my opinion when it comes to federal rules and regulations. And so there is always a potential something comes up. There's a potential that it could divert. It is a highly fluid movement, but we're trying to identify the things and put the BRA in the best stead to defend itself, especially against claims against our water supply, that is the very popular narrative right this minute, is water use, dams, reservoirs are the cause for most of our whales in the aquatic system. Yes, sir.
Well, my opinion is basically everything is like, and I understand disappear completely, what kind of an impact, you know?
We can't answer that question.
I mean,
We don't have,
is it a predator?
yeah, we're not the right expertise level of ecologists to understand if you took one species out of the eco web, what that would do to the entire environment. One would think that it would be very negative, but where the BRA is, as far as these type of species are concerned, is that Tiffany's told you in the past that we're in a very litigious world. And the folks that are looking out for the snake per se will use the Endangered Species Act on their side. And the way the world turns right now, if the science isn't collected to help justify whether we need to go left or we need to go right, then we're going to find ourselves in a position of not being able to fight for our water supply, whether where the movement's going is right or wrong. So it's where I was with the mussels. If we don't have the science, if we don't have the data, we can't argue and fight for our water, or we can't argue and fight for the snake because we just don't have the data. So that's really the process that we're looking at. Tiffany brought this to me months and months ago to our risk management team, and my response was the same as the chairman's. Okay, gee whiz, we just spent a lot of money on mussels. Now we're going to spend a lot of money on snakes. Go back and look at everything that's coming, so this doesn't become the species of the month to our board of directors that we're going and asking for all this money. So I think her staff has done a really unique look. We were the first river authority to do a CCAA. Others are falling in line. And I think when other river authorities see this, they'll come sit down with Tiffany because she is a very well-respected environmental expert in the river authority world, and I think they'll come sit down with her and begin to look at what her staff have put together and use something like this to determine when do you spend money and when do you not spend money. But to me, it's about if you find yourself in a vulnerability and you have to either protect the snake or the water, the best way to do it is with the science.
And the science will help us also know there's always the potential, and it's scary with any investigation, whether it's water quality monitoring, we may learn something we don't like in this, but at least we see it coming and we can determine a solution and what we need to do to remedy that if there is an impact. So not having data, Parks and Wildlife wants to embark on writing a conservation plan, but they don't understand the species. So how effective can a conservation plan be when you don't need what the species needs to survive? So they're gonna spend some money on a nice report that's probably not going to be effective at bringing the species back to its former glory. Yes.
And it's very important to follow the science. I think we've been through that, certainly. But I'm just wondering, if there's a fungal aspect or a medical aspect to this, is there any possibility, particularly in terms of just figuring out what the narrative is or what the science is, maybe reaching out to the vet school at A&M to ask for some help on that? And if you've got a fungus among us or whatever it is that's killing these snakes, then maybe that's a route to take, and that could also help in other areas.
That's certainly something we can look into. I am not aware of any treatment for wild snakes for this particular fungal disease. We have been submitting some of our swabs to a professor at Texas State University who's been doing the actual testing for us, thankfully. But that's certainly an avenue we can add and look to, is a discussion of, is there anything that can be done, and what would it take to get that solution delivered out to the snake population? I'm just not aware that anyone has identified a cure for snake fungal disease.
Does it kill them or just slow them down?
In and of itself, I'm not aware that it kills them, but it does alter their behavior, so they sun more, it interferes with their temperature regulation, and so they're basically kind of dulls their survival instincts. They stay out and they sun more, so then they're more vulnerable to other predators that will eat them versus going back in their, they live mostly in the cobbles and in the river, and so it does impact their behavior in a way that makes them more prone to being predated upon.
I'd just like to comment. I'm I am glad to hear that the BRA is aware of and is interested in the preservation of those species. Personally, I have witnessed the death of a pristine creek, and we have no horned lizards, we have no striped lizards, we have no quail, and it just keeps going. I've never seen one of these little snakes that you're talking about, but I would like to protect them if they can be. And I'm glad that the BRA is interested in those things and is taking efforts to do those things.
All right. Thank you for the discussion and information. Moving on to agenda item number 6, discussion and possible action on the Brazos water snake. Like I said, what's on the reference.
And I would like to say, our selected consultant is in the back. I'll introduce him first this time instead of waiting till the end. Ed O'Borney with BioWest is the principal. He is here. The Brazos water snake is endemic to the Brazos Basin and really from Whitney to the north in the basin and up through the Clear Fork. So he has a very limited known historic range. It's non-venomous. He is fairly tolerant of people. We do find them at boat ramps on Granbury with some frequency, and now that we've started to look a little more, we're finding them at PK too. That's somewhat unusual for snakes. Normally they don't want to see us any more than we want to see them. He is a mostly aquatic snake, lives in the stream beds and in the riffles in the streams, feeds on fish, frogs, all things aquatic. Beyond that, we really don't know a whole lot about them. We don't know what they need to breed. We don't have a really good understanding of their current distribution. There's some significant work historically from the 80s and even as far back as the 50s, but there has not been a lot of attention to the snake since the early 90s when they first discovered the decline in the overall numbers. So let's see, this is a map of the existing known range. We know there's a fairly good population in the Clear Fork. Very little work's been done between PK and Granbury or Granbury and Whitney. And like I said, we're starting to learn more and more that they can occur in the reservoirs and certain types of habitat. The species was listed by the state of Texas as a threatened species in 1986, and until today, no significant conservation actions have been undertaken. That is one of the key items that individuals will use to sue the federal government to say they need to come in and protect this species because the state has not done anything. And right now, that would be the case. Like I said, Parks and Wildlife is starting to try to work on a conservation plan, but we don't really have good data to write a good conservation plan with. Threats, and some of this I already spoiled, was dam siltation, hydrologic change, and incursion by salt cedar. Those are all things that generally get attributed back to change in the hydrologic regime of a stream, which gets tied back to reservoirs. That is the primary thing that we have heard from the university research committees. Like I said, TPWD reached out to us early this year and has asked us to partner. We have agreed to. Since that date, we haven't had any contact, so I don't know exactly where the status is on that. But we would like to try to work. Are there areas where we can do some conservation? By showing that BRA and Parks and Wildlife are actively pursuing things to benefit the species, can we avert the need for federal intervention? If there are active local conservation efforts in place, a lot of times Fish and Wildlife will say it is not justified for us to intervene because the state's taking care of it. And they love that answer because it's one less thing they have to deal with. We have a proposed study of anticipated 3-year duration. We'd like to look at the species distribution within that known range. the occupancy and abundance and habitat associations. Like I said, we did some preliminary work last year to refine and develop the scope of work for this study. We found them in 4 locations where they hadn't been previously recorded. We also found them in some habitat types that hadn't been previously documented. So it goes to support that we just don't know a lot about the needs of the species. Look at the age structure, you know. Clearly, it's not just a bunch of old snakes out there. Those are some juveniles that were found. How are they moving? Are they utilizing different habitats for different life stages? That was one of the questions. We found them in some grasslands, which that's not normal, at least according to all the literature. You shouldn't have found them there. Are they using those grassy areas for something we don't understand? And the reason for a 3-year duration is really to generate statistically valid data so that we can then turn around and get that information published in a herpetology journal. That is the standard that gets you attention at U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They respect those scientific publications. So trying to get your reproducibility and create a statistically valid data set. Now, we have a contract with BioWest for not to exceed $750,000. We do have in the draft contract a requirement that at the end of each fiscal year, we're going to stop and present to the Risk Management Committee, discuss whether further research is warranted. Hopefully, we go out this first year and we find millions of them, and we find the magic honey hole that no one's ever looked, and there is no need to go further. I think the odds are slim, but we have that option in there where we do have stops in the contract. So each fiscal year we'll stop, we'll discuss with the Risk Management Committee. If they decide to move forward, we will issue BioWest a formal written notice to proceed to move to the next year's activities.
So the Risk Management Committee is something that we put in place a couple of years ago for, it's a way for our executive managers to monitor and understand risk at different milestones of different projects, all the way from the infancy of a project to final completion. And that's what we would do to the board also. Whatever we took to that Risk Management Committee as far as it relates to this, at the end of a 12-month period, we would bring that to the board and present to you why we think it's justifiable to stop in place or to move forward.
And this project, we also did issue an RFP. This one, we received 1 response. This one, I'm fairly confident I know exactly why we received 1 response, because working with snakes is dangerous. And there are not a lot of people who spend a lot of time or effort on snakes. There's a lot of folks who work on birds. There's a lot of business for birds. Snakes and reptiles are not super common yet for coming up. We're seeing more and more dune sagebrush lizards, some of those additional species that thankfully we don't have to tackle coming up, but there hasn't been in the state of Texas a big need for a lot of firms to develop reptile experience, and so we're fortunate that there is one in the state that does have staff with reptile experience. So I suspect that's the reason we only received 1 is not a lot of folks want to go stick their hands in a trap that may also have a water moccasin and a rattlesnake and a copperhead in it, because the traps are not necessarily species specific, unfortunately. So if there's more discussion or questions, I'm open.
Yes, thank you. My question, I guess I understand that it's to only like Brazos. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. How does kind of protecting that snake, how does it partner with our mission of preserving water?
Great question.
That they go pretty well hand in hand. If there is sufficient water out there in the environment and we're maintaining the health of the string, these snakes are going to have what they need to survive. I also think that there's a lot of potential, especially around our reservoirs when we do different projects at our parks. We recently just did one at Lake Granbury, where we have the potential to not only make our park better, but also to do some activities that will help benefit the snake. On the Granbury project, they were going to rip wrap a natural drainage anyway, The Brazos water snake needs small holes to protect it from the larger diamondback water snake. We worked with engineering and the lake staff, and they purchased some varied size rubble. It didn't cost us any more or any less than what we would have spent anyway. And we now get to check the box that we've done a conservation action. So that also helps with our supporting the natural resources of the state.
How does it help with water?
So the way that it would impact our water supply, and I'll take you back to the freshwater mussels. If the species that got listed as endangered or threatened, if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife would have determined that those species needed more water, then they would have turned to the Brazos River Authority and said, okay, because you have these species in your watershed, you're going to take another 100, 200, 300,000 acre feet of water, and you're going to let that out of your system. We don't have any water per se that's not under contract. So that would mean we would have to turn to our customers and say, okay, we're going to start cutting back your water contracts, industries, cities, farmers, and you can't use that water any longer because now we're using that water to keep in the river for mussels. And if that's what needs to happen, then that's what needs to happen. But it needs to happen based on science and information and not on emotion and litigation. And that's the distinction that we're trying to make. And one day we may have a species that drives us there, but it needs to drive us there because we've spent the time to make sure that the release of that water would be the solution and not fungus or something else that's driving that population down. So that's the reason that's a great question. That boils it down to its essential.
Significant case law from other states supporting what David did, where the federal courts went in and basically took water supply and dedicated it solely for the use of the species.
Director Lloyd had a question.
So, excuse me, I understand and agree with what the approach is here, the importance of it. We'd rather make decisions based on facts, science that we believe in, rather than, say, emotion or myths or unknown information. How do we evaluate whether $750,000 over 3 years is reasonable, expected, without multiple people coming to compete for the work? Kind of goes back to the bidding thing that we were talking about earlier. But Tiffany, I mean, you feel good about it. You wouldn't have brought it to us. Tell me why that number is okay, as opposed to.
To do what we're proposing to do is going to be a very labor-intensive effort. It's going to take a significant number of scientists out on that river for months at a time, tracking. They're going to radio tag so we can follow movements. That's all. It's a significant labor contribution in addition to the inherent risk of it that also makes it a little bit more. But it's really the man hours to actually spend the time out on the river, learning about the snake, turning rocks, rolling things over. It's a significant crew.
Okay. And the second part of that is why. I understand the importance of it and all that. Why now? Are we worried about something on the immediate horizon indicated by something out of DC or?
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Office out of Arlington has sniffed around and made some inquiries. I don't know that they have any further attempt to go in, but they are definitely watching what Parks and Wildlife and we do. So I think there is potential that it will eventually show up on their list. We're trying to get ahead of it and check that box before it ever hopefully gets there. And we can do our study and we hopefully publish, and it's enough to help us know that, continued efforts where we can, when we do projects around our reservoirs to maybe make a little extra habitat since they are people-friendly snakes, things like that we can defend and keep them interested in other species, because we are actively working on learning about the species, actively working within what we can do to provide some conservation, and then hopefully also get Parks and Wildlife active and engaged. I know they are trying to pursue getting, they sell the license plates, and I know their herpetologist is trying to also get some license plate money to fund some building of habitat along the river. He doesn't know if he'll get that yet, but if we can do all of those things, hopefully we can keep the Arlington field office at bay and they'll go focus on something else. And hopefully somebody else is facing.
So I agree that this is a good thing, but why would we need to take on this entire amount and not potentially partner with the 12 counties that the snake is found in and give them kind of a stake in the game? Or why not let Texas Parks and Wildlife take this on themselves and take that full amount into their budget?
Texas Parks and Wildlife is underfunded for the tasks and scopes that they have. Like I said, they're fighting to get $5,000 to go build a riprap habitat somewhere along the river. I don't think that's going to be an issue with their budget situation that they're in. The counties, honestly, I don't know that the counties would care. It's not going to affect their ability to function. It might make building a bridge a little more difficult from time to time, but just like I wouldn't recommend we go after those species that we're gonna have to encounter on the Bell House Drought Preparedness Plan or Allen's Creek. From a construction standpoint, those can be dealt with construction permitting. They're not going to lose water that's key to their existence. They're not going to lose any of their key county functions because the snake gets listed.
Director Steffen.
Tiffany, you know that because of the water analysis that you do, that if there's a new laboratory procedure that gets developed where you have a greater detectability, then the regulatory agencies suddenly determine that now the new standard is at the lower level of the detectability, where it may not even present a real threat. There's many precedents for this. You also said that sometimes you find out things that's not really what we were hoping to find. You know, we could find out something in this study that would actually worsen, our risk. So I'm only thinking about it from a risk standpoint. We're going to go spend $750,000 for something that's not a clear and immediate present danger. We also don't know if we find out something when we do this study that could actually put us in a greater position of risk. And, we also have this precedent of every time there's new information that we, in our good intentions, are trying to find out to educate people could be used against us, in litigation. And I'm struggling with this a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a very fair question. That is, unfortunately, the world my department lives in. Every time we go and pull a water sample, we could be coming back with a good news story or a very bad news story. To me, I would rather, know ahead of time if I have a problem versus waiting for someone else to tell me I have a problem. I'd like to have some data to quantify the level of that problem where I can hopefully formulate some solutions and implement some solutions before we have a problem. That's how I look and approach this study.
All right, Tiffany, before we read the resolution, I just want to make one final comment. I appreciate the thought of your risk management team coming back after a year to analyze whether or not it's worth moving forward. I too have difficulty with the consideration of approving that amount with knowing that this can just keep going on and on and on, and before we know it, in 3 years, you're coming back and saying, you know what, we've gotten a lot of data, and we need to keep collecting data, and we want you to approve another $750,000. So my concerns are approving that amount. I would have felt more comfortable with you just looking at 1 year and giving us some deliverables that you would be looking at to bring back to the board.
Madam
But
Chair,
at that, if you could read the resolution. Yes.
Why not just do a year?
So let me make a recommendation. Hearing the concerns that I've heard and the really good questions, let me let me make a recommendation that we withdraw this agenda item today and bring this back in 2 months with a couple of pieces of information. One, with a 1-year contract. Two, with more of an explanation about how our partnership could look with Texas Parks and Wildlife. And then three, I, for the most part, agree with what Tiffany said. I don't think most of the counties are going to be interested, but if there is a particular 1 or 2 county that we need to look at that may be dealing with excessive growth, like Bell County and Williamson County are, then this may be an issue that those counties are interested in. So let us go put together what those relationships and opportunities may be and come back to you at the next board meeting with a go-around of a 1-year contract. And then I think, Director Lloyd, where you're going is to, again, make the staff bring that risk management to the board. We'll discuss it, then you can approve it $250,000 at a time. And ironically, that's the way we budget our projects anyway. So we have to come back to you on an annual basis for more money. So my recommendation would be that we go down the path of putting that information together, come back to you in whatever the next board meeting is, March, with that recommendation.
I just want to be clear, like, this spreadsheet, the way you analyze this and run a formula with weighted factors for each one is beautiful. It's awesome. Okay, that's exactly the way that I would approach this if I knew what I was doing, and I don't. And you do. So I think that's incredible. I'm saying I think the work's there. I'm saying I trust you. I'd like to know why. I'd like to know more of the thought process, like seeing it.
We'll happily set something up and I can walk through the process of the spreadsheet, and we have an associated departmental standard operating procedure that's probably a little dull on who does what at what time of the year and things like that. But I'll happily sit down and explain and walk you through the different metrics and why we thought they were important or not.
Yeah, I'm not saying on the side. I'm just saying I think the work's been done to answer these questions. is all I'm saying, and I think it's excellent work.
And the other option is you can just choose to approve us for 1 year today, and we can on the fly amend that resolution as it reads from 750 to 250.
The contract's not done.
Well, we have the principal here. Maybe, do you have anything that would help illuminate, what your approach would be on what you hope to find, or while you're here? Come up to the mic.
Okay, certainly.
While you're walking, thank you for being here. I appreciate that you're here to answer these.
Well, my pleasure. It's been a while, but it's good to see everybody. Happy to answer any additional questions. Specifically, I think, I was back there, I was just biting my tongue a little bit, but at that February 21st Texas Parks and Wildlife meeting for the conservation plan that they put together, and they invited the researchers to that, including Fish and Wildlife, USGS, Parks and Wildlife, and university professors. One particular university professor said, well, there's so few snakes out there, they're declining, it's because of the reservoirs, why are we even looking anymore? Well, I've been playing this game for 30 years. When you look, you find. When you find, you understand. When you understand, you can make informed decisions. So to have a university professor tell me he's done looking, that basically says if the Fish and Wildlife Service calls him, he's going to say they're in decline because the reservoirs list this species. It's unacceptable to me as a scientist. So I was quite alarmed at that conservation meeting. Tiffany was on the phone for that meeting as well. And so that's one where I think it's really important. Why a 3-year study versus a 1-year study? These are rare species. We went out last summer, we caught 24 of them. We weren't able to sample during the best time, which is in the fall, because we didn't have a contract in the fall. 24 species in a summer, you're like, wow, that's hardly any. I can find more bees in my backyard. Well, the previous study by Stephen Thompson that went for 3 years, they found 9 at this one particular reach. And so for us finding 24 in the summer, that was a big deal. And the main time is in the fall where you can actually find more. So in my 30 years of working with endangered species, especially rare species, is you need the time to do the study right, and you need to be able to search the entirety of the area. And it's been rare that we haven't found more than what university professors, agency folks, and people have told us, because you got to put in the time to look at it. So other specific question, I could ramble on about, you can't have a good statistical study in 1 year where you go out to a site one time and find a snake. That's an observation. The next time you go there, he may or may not be there. So that's an observational data. You need to have statistical data. So that's why more information is needed.
So you're hunting for them, and I guess when you find them, are you able to determine their health, whether they have this fungus or not? And then, so once you find them, what are we hoping to find that would be better data, to support the fact that it wasn't the reservoirs that caused this reduction?
Great question. So we've got the guys that most of us, it's not me, trust me, when I see a snake, I kind of step back, but I've got guys that when they see a snake, they jump in the water and chase it. So when you find them, you take them out, you take a blood sample, you send the blood sample off for genetics. You also look for snake fungal disease to see if they have that on there. You're also taking all sorts of habitat measurements in that immediate area to see if, are there fire ants all over the place? Are there no fire ants? Are there, a number of different disturbances? Is it a bridge crossing? Is it, whatever? So you're documenting your habitat conditions based on where you've actually found the snakes. You're also looking at time of year. You're also looking at size of snake. Is it an adult? Is it a juvenile? You're also looking at what kind of food sources are there. Are there a bunch of red shiners there that these things can eat or can't eat? And why aren't there fish there if there weren't? Were there herbicides or pesticides? So you're looking at a lot of information so that you can go back and explain exactly why or why not that snake was present at that site. Another example is time of year. And what you'll see is that if an organism breeds during a certain time of year, a lot of times they'll use a different habitat requirement. So maybe the snake in the springtime moves, or in the fall moves from, and I'm using made ups because people don't know, the university professors don't know. What if it goes from these cobbles on river's edge and moves down to water's edge from April through June every year, which requires X amount of water flowing through that river, or whatever time of year. That means that the surface has that information. They know exactly what water's needed to go through. What if it moves the other direction? What if it moves up where that water's edge isn't as valuable? So you learn things about how much water needs to be in the river at a given time, or not in the river at a given time, which then affects how much you can withdraw, how much you can discharge, how much other stuff. So it really does tie, even though they're semi-aquatic, back to water. And then for, can we tell what's causing it? If you go out and do a year study, likely not. You do a 2-year study, probably not. You do a 3-year study, maybe. We originally proposed a 5-year study when we were using rare endangered species. You'll never have certainty. You can do a 100-year study. The question about will you come back and ask for more money, every scientist will come back and ask for more money and more studies. We won't get it. So what we're told to do, we knew we wouldn't get a 5-year study. He's chuckling, knew we wouldn't. So you go with what you can get you the best information to defend you with science, as opposed to being told by a university professor.
Terrific, thanks.
Then, lastly, real quick, we've been doing this for a long time. We will partner in a way that makes the results believable. We'll work with Parks and Wildlife. They have no money, but they'll work with us. They're excited about this study. We sent off the samples to USGS Health Lab at their samples from this last summer. They did the samples for us for free, because they're interested in the snake fungal disease. So we'll partner in a way that the agencies will feel inclusive, and we'll buy off on this.
What about using university students? They have to get their certain amount of hours in ecology or whatever anyway. or biology study,
Yeah,
so.
the teaming, Texas State has a good program. David Rodriguez, we're actually teamed with David Rodriguez on various projects. He's got a good group of kids out there. You got some safety issues with snakes and some of the stuff on water that we do. Universities, students are a great opportunity. Can we take volunteers? Anytime anybody around the table wants to volunteer,
nakes.
come out, run the river. We
No
take
nakes for
volunteers.
me.
So yeah, it's a great one.
All right, Director Lattimore.
If I can get my mic on. Madam Chair, I listened to what our CEO said a few minutes ago. I generally make mistakes when I do things on the fly, and I think our best course of action would be to allow him to withdraw this off the agenda and come back to us at our next meeting with a well-planned, well-thought-out proposal, and we'll go forward from there.
All right, so we have a motion on the table to withdraw the agenda item and have David and Tiffany and her team come back. Is there a second?
Second.
Second made by Director Henderson. Please pull the board.
Presiding Officer Flores.
Yes.
Director Huber.
Yes.
Director Taylor.
Yes.
Director Geezy.
Yes.
Director Henderson.
Yes.
Director Jimenez.
Yes.
Director Crone.
Yes.
Director Lattimore.
Yes.
Director Leslie.
Yes.
Director Lloyd.
Yes.
Director Luton.
Yes.
Director Enbro.
Yes.
Director Ruiz.
Yes.
Director Sanderson. Director Savage.
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
It is 12:47 at this time. We will stop for lunch and reconvene after. Thank you. To agenda item number 7. So, agenda item number 8, discussion and possible action on fiscal year 2021 annual comprehensive financial report by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer. David.
Good afternoon. I have Aaron Wortham here from Baker Tilly. He's the partner in charge of the audit for FY21. This is the fiscal year ending August 31st. So I want Aaron to give you a report of the audit itself, and feel free to ask him any questions you want to. Aaron?
Sounds good. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Aaron Worthman, partner in charge of the audit engagement with Baker Tilly, and I'm pleased to present the fiscal year 2021 financial audit. What I want to do first is just go through an audit overview. What exactly is it that we do as part of our audit engagement? I then want to go through our auditor communication with UCharge's governance, briefly talk about internal control communication, and open it up to any questions you have. Just as a side note, I was also able to meet with the Audit Committee this morning. This will be the highlights of that presentation. So first off, what we're doing is we're providing an audit of your annual financial comprehensive report. In addition to that, you've also received what we call our audit results letter. Within that, we have a formal communication with UCharge's governance as well. So this year's audit, it went very well. If we take a step back and look at the audit this year, it was conducted 100% remotely, given the COVID environment. I would say our firm, we've probably been doing this now, I think we're closing in on 2 years, but that process went very well. Just to give you some perspective, our firm, the individuals on the audit team, we spent about 500 hours on the audit engagement. But again, the audit was conducted remotely with no difficulties. We conduct 2 weeks of remote fieldwork and 1 week of preliminary fieldwork. Our last date of our fieldwork was November 5th of 2021. If we were to take a look at the audit, I'd say 30% of what we do is specific to internal controls. and testing internal controls, most of which would be your information technology controls. So much so, in fact, that as part of our audit team, we have a certified information systems auditor that goes about and conducts that testing. But that's 30% of what we do. 40% of what we do is specific to substantive tests. That's the nuts and bolts of our audit, if you will. That would be taking a look at your confirmations with your investments and your cash accounts. Taking a look at the support for fixed asset additions, fixed asset retirements. But again, 40% of what we do. 30% then deals with taking a look at your annual financial report and the planning of our audit engagement. But what I've done here is I've illustrated some of our major areas of emphasis when we conduct the audit. And most of these should be of no surprise. For instance, if you see assets under construction and plant and service, well, that comprises most of your balance sheet. Cash and investments, utility revenue and billing, financial reporting. But again, these are the major areas of emphasis when we conduct the audit. So our audit was performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. Those are the standards that we are required to follow as your audit firm. In addition to that, we also need to comply with government auditing standards. Those are standards, additional standards specific to our independence as your audit team, quality control of our audit, the supervision of the audit team, due care, and the continuing professional education of our audit team. So our audit objective is to obtain reasonable assurance that your financial statements are free from material misstatement. At the end of this year's audit, your financial statements have received an unmodified opinion, which is also known as a clean opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can provide as your audit firm. One thing I wanted to discuss briefly here is I did want to point out that although we provide an opinion on your financial statements, we do not provide an opinion on internal controls. So I'll touch on that in a second. Within that audit results letter that I talked about, we have that formal communication with UCharge's governance. Just a couple highlights. One is, I'm pleased to report that our firm and every individual on your engagement is independent with your organization, in fact, and appearance. We did not have any significant or unusual transactions as part of the audit this year, and we did not have any major changes in accounting policies. We often get asked by governing bodies, when you take a look at these financial statements, what are the limitations of those statements? And I will say that normally always has to do with a significant estimate. So as part of our communication, we're required to let you know as governance, what are the major estimates within your financial statements? And those are your net pension obligation, depreciation of your fixed assets, and then your compensated absences. We did not identify any adjusting journal entries as part of this year's audit, which again is a great testament to your team here. And no other major audit findings or concerns. Just know, and I mentioned to the Audit Committee as well, but just know if we ever came across a major finding or an issue that if I were in your shoes, I would want to know about that immediately. Just know I'd have those discussions. The last thing we want is for you folks to have any surprises when we come and give this final audit presentation. But again, no audit findings or concerns. And I had mentioned internal controls, and one thing I wanted to point out, so when we do find control deficiencies, the profession requires us to categorize that in order of severity. So the most severe would be what we call a material weakness. And the definition is it's a control breakdown or lack of controls so severe that there's more than a reasonable possibility that your financial statements would be materially misstated because of that breakdown. And we did not have any material weaknesses. The next categorization is called a significant deficiency. Less severe than a material weakness. However, it's large enough that it would warrant your attention as governance. And we did not identify any significant deficiencies. Now, what I will say is part of any audit engagement that we conduct, we will always have minor control deficiencies, industry best practice recommendations, most of which are going to be in information technology, which isn't surprising given that dynamic nature of cybersecurity and things like that. Just know that we have those discussions with management as part of our exit conference, and from year to year we'll take a look at those to make sure management's following up on those accordingly. But with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their attention, and definitely would like to thank the management team here, David and Matt and their entire accounting staff did a great job, as evidenced by no adjusting journal entries, no significant findings. So again, appreciate all their help and hard work. And with that, I will open it up to any questions you folks may have.
All right, seeing that there are no questions, no discussion, there is a resolution. Thank you for your presentation. David, will you please read the resolution?
I think I'll walk through a few more slides here first and
Okay.
then get the resolution, if that's okay. I kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the folks that may not be familiar with the comprehensive report. I'll talk a little bit about the purpose, the highlights, and of course, Aaron's given his report already. The purpose that we audit this is because we need to make sure that our financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with, as Aaron says, GAAP and GASB. Now, there is a difference between the financial report and the operating budget that we present to you in July. One is more of historical, looking back at events prior to August 31st. And then the budget is forward-thinking. It's a perspective document that looks at the plan. Key is the financial report that we get audited is accrual basis and GAAP, whereas the operating budget is cash basis. It's basically expenditures and how much we spend in cash as opposed to accruals. The report itself is made up of three key elements. The first is the transmittal letter. If you read that, it'll give you the highlights of key events that happened in 2021, FY21. It's got your balance sheet, your income statement, and it has the unaudited part of the back, which is really the things like revenue sources, financial trends, debt capacity, things that help explain some of our financials that we have at BRA. Also, I want to mention that the whole structure of this report itself is organized under what's called GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association's requirements. And this is a group that comes in and judges and grades your financial reports. In the last 35 years, we have gotten excellent awards from that group itself. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between the budget and the actual comprehensive financial report. And the key is accrual basis, GAAP versus cash, primary cash basis. Depreciation, which is an expense under GAAP, but it's not used in the budget. Principal payments on debt is an expenditure, but when you go look at the financial GAAP reporting, it's really an adjustment to the balance sheet. Next is GASB 68 allocation. It's a pension requirement that we have from that. In that case, we actually picked up $1.5 million in the financials part of it, but not in the budget. It's not a budget item. And then capital expenditures, and this is like trucks and tractors, the PK cranes in there, those are expenditures. We actually spend money on those vehicles. So that really leads up to about $607,000 difference between the two. But you can see the trend is between GAAP and basically cash basis. This just takes a look at the 2 years trending as far as that. The biggest difference is in your interest income, and that is because thankful from the Federal Reserve dropping rates down from where we were at 3% in 20 down to 0, but we've been able to keep a little bit of money off that. So with that, are there any questions? I went through that rather quickly, so let's see if anybody. All right, I'll read the resolution. Be it resolved that the Board of Directors hereby accept the Brazos River Authority Annual Comprehensive Financial Report for fiscal year ended 2021 and approves its filing with Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and be it further resolved that the Chief Financial Officer is hereby designated to file the report and the annual filings of the affidavit with executive directors of the Texas Commission on Environment Quality.
Of the resolution, is there a motion to adopt? So moved by Director Crone, second by Director Ruiz. Please poll the board.
Presiding Officer Flores?
Yes?
Director Huber?
Yes.
Director Taylor?
Yes.
Director Geesey?
Yes.
Director Henderson?
Yes.
Director Jimenez?
Yes.
Director Crone?
Yes.
Director Lattimore?
Yes.
Director Leslie?
Yes.
Director Lloyd?
Yes.
Director Luton?
Yes.
Director Embro?
Yes.
Director Ruiz?
Yes.
Director Sanderson? Director Savage?
Yes.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Agenda item number 7, discussion and possible action on retirement committee membership by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer. David.
Okay, this is dealing with the appointments to the retirement committee, and presiding officer Flores has made her appointments and positions in there. The only thing left to do is to get the board to ratify her appointments. So if there are any questions, I'll read the resolution.
All right. Seeing there are no questions.
Okay. Be resolved that the retirement committee shall be comprised of no more than 9 members and no less than 5 members elected from the board of directors. And be it further resolved that the board of directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby ratifies presiding officer Flores' appointment of the following individuals to serve as members of the retirement committee: Jen Henderson, chair; Ford Taylor, vice chair; Christine Geesey, and then Royce Lacey and John Henry Luton. Appointments. The appointments of the members of the committee shall serve on the committee until successors appointed.
You've heard the reading of the resolution. There's a question.
No, I'm moving.
Your motion, okay. Director Lloyd has made a motion, second by Wilson. Please pull the board.
Presiding Officer Flores?
Yes?
Director Huber?
Yes.
Director Taylor?
Yes.
Director Geesey?
Yes.
Director Henderson?
Yes.
Director Jimenez?
Yes.
Director Crone?
Yes.
Director Lattimore?
Yes.
Director Leslie?
Yes.
Director Lloyd?
Yes.
Director Luton?
Yes.
Director Embro?
Yes.
Director Ruiz?
Yes.
Director Sanderson? Director Savage?
Yes.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Agenda item number 9, discussion and possible action on BRA investment policy by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer. David.
Okay. Public Funds Investment Act requires that I bring to the board each year our investment policies. We had a rather strange year last year that there was no legislation against the Public Funds Investment Act. Therefore, we reviewed it along with Valley View Consulting Group and saw that there was no changes to the investment policy as it stands. So with that, I still need to get approval and adoption of the policy. Are there any questions?
Seeing no questions, please read the resolution.
Be resolved that the Board of Directors of Brazos River Authority has reviewed and hereby adopts the Brazos River Authority investment policy, including the investment strategy statements, approved broker and dealer list, and approved training sources as presented to the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority on January 31st, 2022.
A motion was made by Dr. Ruiz, a second by Royce Leslie. Please poll the board.
Presiding Officer Flores?
Yes.
Director Huber?
Yes.
Director Taylor?
Yes.
Director Geesey?
Yes.
Director Henderson?
Yes.
Director Jimenez?
Yes.
Director Crone?
Yes.
Director Lattimore?
Yes.
Director Leslie?
Yes.
Director Lloyd?
Yes.
Director Luton?
Yes.
Director Embro?
Yes.
Director Ruiz?
Yes.
Director Sanderson?
Yes.
Director Savage?
Yes.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Agenda item number 10, discussion and possible action on ratification of the 2022 rates for the replacement water supply agreements, two-tier contracts by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer. David.
Okay, the replacement water supply agreement, which is called a two-tier, came out of a negotiated settlement in 1991 rate case. There's about 100,000 acre feet, 13 agreements that's involved here. Two of the largest customers involved is Dow and Bell County. And the reason it's referred to as two-tier is there's one called the activated, or the water used, and then one not activated. And that is basically water not used, and it's half the election rate. In July, when I presented to get the system rate, we only had estimates at that time. We have to wait till the CPI index of November comes out in December to do the calculations. We did do the calculations, and we did send letters out to the 13 customers that proposed new rates, telling them that we can only wait till the board ratifies the rates. Right now, the activated water, it went up about 97 cents, and the other one went up about 48 cents. Once we approve the two-tier customer, we'll bill those out to the customers themselves.
Seeing none. Dr. Reese, are you making a motion to accept that? Yes. All right, motion made by Dr. Reese, second by Director Crum. Please pull the board.
I like that.
Presiding Officer Flores,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
Yes.
Director Geezy. Yes. Director Henderson,
Yes.
Director Jimenez,
Yes.
Director Crum,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Leslie,
Yes.
Director Lloyd,
Yes.
Director Luton,
Yes.
Director Rainbow,
Yes.
Director Ruiz,
Yes.
Director Sanderson,
Yes.
Director Savage,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Read it for ourselves.
And David, just for the record, would you please read that
Okay.
resolution?
Be resolved that the Board of Directors of Brazos River Authority hereby ratifies the 2022 rates of $28.95 per acre feet for the election used water and $14.47 per acre foot for the option used water, as adjusted in accordance with the formula stated in existing replacement water supply agreements.
All right, thank you.
It's official.
Agenda item number 11, discussion and possible action on surplus personal property by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer.
Again, this is a state statute requirement, and hopefully everybody knows what this is about, but and we're required anytime the property is defective or too expensive to repair, or we just don't need, we have to bring it for the board to get it disposed of. Once we read it, get it accepted, we put it out on a well advertised auction to sell it. So I'll let you look at the properties we're going to get rid of. Let's see, I think I went too fast. No, that's it.
Pretty faster than that.
I tried to make it just one page. So. Any questions?
Any questions? Please read the resolution.
Be resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby authorize the General Manager, CEO, to dispose of the following surplus property, personal properties, under the terms and conditions that are in the best interest of Brazos River Authority. Be it further resolved that the Board of Directors authorizes the General Manager, CEO, in certain instances to continue to use or maintain previously authorized surplus properties in a manner that is the best interest of the Brazos River Authority until appropriate replacement property is received and placed in service. Lot number 1, quantity 23 LSI in-ground uplight lamp holders. Lot number 2, quantity 26 parking lot lights, 400 watt mercury lamps. Lot 3, a 2009 Ford Expedition, VIN number 1FMU155X9EA97390. Lot 4, John Deere Gator 4x2, ID number W004X2X109581. Lot 5, Hoffman Blower Model 74206B1, serial number P004693, Reliance Electric Motor Model P44G052C, Kubota Model RCR 60-inch mower deck only, Manitowoc 3900. It's a 100-ton crane with 100-foot angle boom and 30-foot jib. Magnum airless paint sprayer, model B02B, and Hosty hot water pressure washer tank, serial number HO 602-67324.
You've heard the reading of the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt? Motion made by Director Henderson, second by Director Crone. Please pull the board.
Presiding Officer Flores,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Taylor,
Yes.
Director Geezy,
Yes.
Director Henderson,
Yes.
Director Jimenez,
Yes.
Director Crone,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Leslie,
Yes.
Director Lloyd,
Yes.
Director Luton,
Yes.
Director Ambrose,
Yes.
Director Ruiz,
Yes.
Director Sanderson,
Yes.
Director Savage,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Agenda item number 12, report and possible discussion on fiscal year 2022 first quarter budget report by David Thompson, Chief Financial Officer. David.
Okay, I'd like to talk about the three key elements involved with our financials, and that is our revenue. And in this case, we did have a variance, a negative variance for the first quarter, and it's related to Brazos Electric bankruptcy, in which they returned 8,000 acre feet, which we plan to sell. Now, we do have in the second quarter, 1.7 million coming back on interruptible water that will also replace that. Expenses are down by 1.5 under budget. A lot of that's timing, and some of it is underspending, and capital projects are on track. So here are the numbers. I do remind you that in the first quarter, we get about 70%, 60 to 70% of our revenues in from our contracts, water contracts. Any questions? This is the how we spent the expenditures in the first quarter. That's it. Any questions?
Any questions for David? Seeing no questions.
Okay, the investment portfolio it's required by Public Funds Investment Act that I give each quarter a report to the board. We ended at the November 21st, at the end of the first quarter, with $171 million. This is how we have it invested, and I have it invested on the based off our cash flows needs, also in securities, letting you know that every dollar that we have out there is collateralized. It's protected. And because of the way the interest rates are now, we're still doing better than the Texas pool and treasury bills, barely, but that's still 0.25%. That's all we earn off that.
Questions or comments regarding this agenda item number 13 regarding the quarterly investment report? All right. Thank you, David. All right. Item number 14, the Board of Directors will conduct a closed meeting and executive session on the following matters. A, to consult with the attorney regarding litigation with respect to the Allens Creek Reservoir pursuant to the authority granted by Section 551.071 of the Texas Open Meetings Act, codified as Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code, and to deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property in Austin County in relation to Allen's Creek Reservoir pursuant to the authority granted by Section 551.072 of the Texas Open Meetings Act. If you are not specifically involved in the presentation of the first executive agenda item, please excuse yourself from the boardroom at this time. With each executive session agenda item, time will be allowed to clear the boardroom and call the next presenter. We ask that the public please wait in the break room in order to keep the hallways clear until the executive session is finished. The Board of Directors hereby reconvenes into open session at 12:12 p.m. There is no resolution. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting at this time?
I move.
Director Henderson, second made by Director Geesey. Please pull the board. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody.